It was about 8 years ago in 2007 that the Barna Research Group helped publish a book that kind of compiled their research about the patterns of church attendance by young millennials. It was a book entitled Unchristian, and what they discerned, what they discovered in researching and interviewing and surveying young millennials, most of them were probably unchurched, as they were turned off by the church for 5 principal reasons. One, they felt like the church, Christians were too political. That we were more interested in our political agendas than we were around other agendas. That church became a place where we either accepted or rejected whether we held the same political opinions or different political opinions. They felt like the church, the Christians, were too anti-homosexual, that they carried judgment towards people who had a different orientation. That they were too insensitive. That when men and women went through difficult times and suffering, they felt like they offered platitudes instead of presence and compassion for people in the middle of suffering. That we were too judgmental. Christians are too judgmental, more focused on the problems of others, and that we're too hypocritical. That our walk and our talk never seemed to match up. Now, we've discovered in the 8 years since that book was published that things really haven't changed. In fact, what people who study these things are discovering is it's not just young people who are leaving the church, it's people of different ages for a lot of the same reasons. But it continues to be one of the issues at the top of the list for people leaving the church is that they often feel that Christians say one thing and then we do another. That our walk and our talk rarely match up. We talk about the importance of love and compassion and forgiveness, but our capacity to carry it out never merits the same amount. And that's why I think it's so important that the early church heard this challenge from Jesus. And for us to hear it too. Because in these passages read for us this morning is a linchpin scripture. It's the pin that holds it all together, that reminds us who we are and what we're called to be if we claim that we're followers of Jesus. And if you really want to get into the heart of it, what it says is what it means to be a Christian, that if you want to follow Jesus, you must be willing to deny yourself to follow Him. As he said in the text Adele read, my way is the way of sacrifice. And in doing so, we find life. What does it mean for us to take up the cross and follow Jesus? Let me share a couple of things that come to my mind in spirit this week. And one way to look at what it means for us to take up the cross and follow Jesus is to look at the whole issue of the character of power differently than maybe how we tend to think of power. So we'll start with that question for us. When you think of power, what do you think about? What are the images or words or phrases that come to mind when you think of the word power? Electricity. Yeah. Money. Yeah. People who have money tend to be able to reinforce power, right? What else? Strength. Oh, God, working out. Status. That's right. What else? Influence. What else does power mean? Hierarchy. And, I'm sorry, another one? Authority. What else does power mean?
Leadership.
Oppression, I heard, I think. Leadership. It can be leadership. In fact, it's the best definition of leadership I've heard is influence. Influence. Servant leadership. The power to influence someone by a servant kind of life. In the Greco-Roman world of the first century, in which Jesus lived and shared these words with His disciples and followers, the highest virtue in the Greco-Roman world was power and honor, the two highest virtues. And they did all they could to keep that honor because there was power communicated in that sense of honor. in the way people respected you, the sense in which they held you in high esteem. And honor was not just something you had, it was something conferred. So there was a constant battle to retain that honor. They believed, in fact, I was reading this week, that honor was a closed system, that there's only so much honor in the world. And so if I had less, that meant someone had more. And if they had less, then I must have more. And so they battled to find honor because there was power involved in honor. It was a big deal. It was about status. It was about privilege. It was about where you ended up on the hierarchy of life. And certainly if you had honor and power, you were not expected to be or play the role of a servant or a slave. And yet there's Jesus. Jesus, he turns the whole thing on its head. And instead of the Greco-Roman virtue of honor and power, he lifts up to us the virtue of humility and service as most indicative of the presence and healing power of God. Now, do you remember where he did that most powerfully? It was in the upper room on the night that before he died. And he gathered all of his followers together. And you remember that they weren't open-toed sandals during those days, and so they always had dust on their feet. And so whenever they went into someone's home, the true act of hospitality was to have your slave or your servant take a bowl of water and wash the feet. And here's the thing, a regular person wasn't expected to wash feet. It was to be a slave or a servant. And if you were in a Jewish household, the Jewish people believed that it shouldn't be a Jewish person that should be the servant or the slave to wash your feet. It was so demeaning and so low of where you stood on the ladder of life that they wanted a non-Jew to be the slave or the servant to wash feet. But what does Jesus do? Has them sit down, and the first thing he does is he takes out a bowl of water and he wraps a towel around himself and he gets down on one or two knees and starts washing the feet of the disciples. He washes the feet of the disciples. And then he says, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right. If I wash your feet, then you ought to wash another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. And if you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." That sometimes is a heavy cross to carry, isn't it? Because it's setting aside our ego, our sense of status and power. And even in 21st century America, we still have similar status symbols for power. Strength and ability to move and money. We see it flashed all over this whole political season. This wrestle for whatever status and power can come from being a president. And I've yet heard someone really say, "I've come to serve you. I don't care about status and power. I've come to serve you." Imagine if a president of the United States gathered with his cabinet someday and the first thing he did when they met the first time was to pull out a bowl of water and a towel and wash their feet. Imagine. Whew. And yet, ever since that first time Jesus did it, that's how we think of power and status in a total different way. You see someone that is in a high position and they want someone to serve them, and someone serves them, and you say, "Boy, they must be important." But then you see someone in a high position and you see how they humble themselves and they practice servant leadership in the workplace, and they're more concerned about the needs of people and people who are several rungs down the economic ladder than they are. And you respect that person because you say that person has character and not just power. All because of what Jesus did that one day when he started washing his disciples' feet. And that has influenced our notion of character, of real leadership, servant leadership, ever since. I don't know if you remember 20 years ago when the mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, it caught on fire. And hundreds of workers lost their job. And the owner of the mill decided at the very point that he knew he was going to get insurance money and he could have used that opportunity to move out of Lawrence, Kansas and its high taxes into some other country and make a whole lot more money. What he decided to do, though, was he decided to take both the insurance money to rebuild, but take some of that money to keep every one of his employees on the payroll for 2 months and longer. And it's interesting to notice he was a Jewish person, highly influenced by the Jewish text that said, our calling is to take care of those who are the least of us, those who are suffering and in need of help. And he sacrificed so that others would have life. To follow Jesus is to carry an often heavy cross. Because it invites us. It creates opportunities for us to deny ourselves in the service of God. Too often today, people want to carry the cross without wanting to pay the cost. To follow Jesus is to say, I am second. Is to say, I am second. That means that what Jesus says, to be a disciple, we must carry our cross daily. And it's a daily choice we must make. It's not a martyrdom thing, a once-in-a-lifetime thing that you show your witness to God by becoming a martyr. It's every day we wake up, and in that struggle to be human, we say, Lord, help me be a follower of Jesus today. To say in my relationships, in my work world, in my trip to the store, every place you find me, that I am second, that you may be first in my life and the world, and that the things I say and the things I do match up for the lives and hearts of others whom I touch. Because I'm willing to sacrifice my convenience, my comfort, my time, my treasure, so that the greater truths of God are not just lived in me, because I know if they're living in me, then guess where else they're going to live? Everywhere I go. To be a follower of Jesus is to pick up a heavy cross and say that I am second because I want bigger truths and bigger values. To not just live in my life, but to influence the world. So that what I say and how I live match up. And I can't think of a more fun example of that. I love that. Sounds like it's not just the boys who are rescued. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. He was all in, wasn't he? I mean, literally, his money and his mouth was in the same place. And we don't know anything about his faith life, but I'll tell you what, whether it's a Christian or Jew or just a regular person, that's what it means. To let your walk and your talk be in the same place. It's keeping you from living that out in your life. What worry or anxiety or even comfort is keeping you and me too, from being able to be all in. To not only carry a cross, but accept the cost. There's a wonderful story I heard on NPR. They were interviewing Reverend Billy Kyles. And Billy Kyles was with Dr. King when Dr. King stood on that balcony at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, the morning he was shot. And the interviewer on NPR, he was interviewing him on Martin Luther King Day, and he asked Reverend Kyles what he was going to preach about that morning. And he told the story of Robert Louis Stevenson, who as a boy was sitting by his window, looking intently outside of the window. And those were the days of gas lights and street lights. Gas street lights, and there at the street was the town lamplighter, who would go all around the town and put his ladder up against the lamppost and climb the lamppost and light each lamp that was lit by gas flowing from within. And he watched this lamplighter take his ladder down and climb a post and put it up and take it down and put it up and light lamps all the way down the street. And then Stevenson was asked, "What are you looking at so intently?" And he replied, "I'm watching that man out there knock holes in the darkness." Isn't that what people ought to see in us? People who's, as hard as it is, as imperfect as we are, and we know how imperfect. That's the thing, you know. If people who don't know Christians got to meet real Christians and really hear our stories, like I've had the privilege of being able to do these last 2.5 years, they would know we struggle, and they would know the first thing I hear from you, I am not perfect. But yet there's still this perception. And so let's be lamplighters. Let's let our walk and our talk be the same thing. Let's be all in for the presence of Christ and do something powerful this week. This week. To say, Lord, I'm willing to sacrifice your way, not my way. I'm willing to be second so you can be first. And continue to knock holes in what some people would call darkness. Let's take up our cross. Because I bet when you do, and I wish you would share with me the story, you'll find life. You'll find meaning and purpose, and you will not be the same. And all God's people said.